Warning, incoming game over. Warning, incoming game over.
Hello, everybody. What a game. That was an exciting one. I'm your guest, Kay, or I'm your host, Kay. As always, I have my guest here, Nick Zararis, a
Warning,
Rangers fan,
incoming
but we have to
game
be nice to
over.
him, so just remember that. And would you like to introduce yourself, Nick?
Hello, people of Montreal and Greater Canada. Nick Zararis. I've been doing digital sports media stuff for a long time. I host Liberty Blue, which is a Rangers podcast, which comes out every Monday. I'm the host of Locked On Oilers, which is a daily pod. I do Locked On NHL on Thursdays with Hunter Hodes, which is once a week national stories. I am unfortunately way too into hockey and pay way too much attention to the National Hockey League. But yes, that was a very fun game.
That was a really fun game. I was worried because of the fact that it's a back-to-back. It's a back-to-back for the Rangers too. I thought it'd be like a low energy kind of trap game, and then I remembered neither of these teams are good enough to to shut each other down in that way. So, kind of what were you expecting coming into this game?
The biggest thing for me is that the Rangers are finally watchable again for most of November, December, and I would say the first game or two of January. This was miserable. Every single game, they would concede the first goal. They would be chasing the entire game. Because they were chasing, they'd be conceding even more defensively, and the chances to just try and create some offense. And this was fun. I didn't expect this high scoring of a game. I expected a slight bounce back considering they played a 0-0 game through to the shootout and won 1-0. So basic law of averages would say they probably scored 2 or 3 goals
Yeah.
tonight. But going into a third period with multiple goals on the board for both teams, neither team feeling particularly good about how they play defense, for a struggling team like the Rangers kind of are, I can't really complain all
Yeah.
that much.
Yeah. I think Habs fans were just hoping for I mean, it's the Rangers, so we don't often get a win there. So we were just hoping for a little change of fortunes. I'm seeing a lot of our regulars in the chat. Thank you so much, everybody, for stopping by. We got MFM, we got Frederick, we got all of our lovely people. Trizak says, I missed most of the game. Could Kay please recap it for me with slam poetry? You can come into my DMs for that. I'm not going to do it on stream. So I see Frederick asking here that can he tell us what the F happened to the Rangers? We'll get there, guys. We will get there. Trust me, I have spent way too much time enjoying the Rangers' downfall to not touch on it. I'm a hater at heart. Nick, you followed me on Twitter and on Blue Sky enough to know that that is my main source of joy. So I take what I can.
Schadenfreude is real. Schadenfreude is very real.
So I know I wanted to talk a little bit about, just to give kind of everybody an overview, I'd like to talk a little bit about Jeff Gorton. I don't think that, I think Habs fans have opinions. We don't really know what he does, to be honest, because it's it's a hockey operations, vice president of hockey operations. What does that mean? I don't know. So we can get into that, but we'll get into that a little later. I think we want to just talk a little bit about the game. Um, let's just start with the start, I guess. I was honestly kind of expecting a bad start because I was expecting an almost carryover from last game. Um, as I'm sure you heard, because Leafs fans haven't shut the fuck up about it at all yet. They came back, so I was expecting almost like a. I was hoping for a recovery and showing people that that was a one off. We aren't that team anymore. But I was expecting the worst because I have to protect myself. Um, so I don't know. I wasn't unhappy with how the game started. Um, what was kind of your read, kind of, I guess, what was your expectation for how the game would look right away? And were you as surprised as I was that things seemed relatively even for the first little while, I'd say?
I would say you can kind of tell how a Ranger game is going to go by those first 5 to 10 minutes because so often this year they've been behind from the jump. They've really struggled to get their feet under them in games, and it's very rare they score the first goal in games. Their record split when they score first versus the other team scores first is one of the most dramatic in the entire league. I think they only have like 3 losses the whole season when they score first. Tonight, I think, is the first time they've lost in overtime when that's happened. But as far as the start to the game, I was expecting a little bit more of the shenanigans because unfortunately, whenever Rempe's in the lineup and the other team has one of those guys, whether it's Arbor, whether it's Ryan Reeves, when they play the Flyers, Nick Delorier, when they have one of those guys, that's always kind of how we set the tone of the game is we're going to stop the game no matter what's going on because we need to do this because blah, 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 X, Y, and Z. And it took a little while for that to happen. This game definitely got a little nastier than I
I was
expected it to.
expecting that, yeah.
It's kind of weird to me because like the beef you're alluding to predates everybody on the
100%.
Canadiens
Oh,
and
100%.
only everybody but Chris Kreider on the Rangers. So like it's very weird that there was so much animosity in this game for what's ostensibly, like 6 versus 5 in the wild card. But
Yeah.
weird game in that sense. But as far as trading chances, that's kind of what these teams do. They're both of these teams, their best defensemen are offense first defensemen, and that lends itself to what we were talking about before we started recording. How much defense are you willing to concede to try and create offense? And that was kind of the story of the
Apparently a lot.
game. Both goalies were great tonight. Quick
Yes.
played really well. I thought for what Jonathan Quick is at this stage of his career, I was very impressed with what he gave them tonight. He's still chasing win 400. He will get
Yeah.
there eventually, but
Yeah.
I thought he was really good tonight.
I would have jumped. I would have found some place and I would have jumped if he won against us today. I don't know why. I was just having like I was constantly just sending him bad vibes so hard. And I think it worked, guys. I don't think it was the team on ice. I think it was me. So you're welcome. And I'm sorry, Nick. So so for us, it's as Trizak says, Gallagher passed down the lore. I actually think that there's some sort of reality to that because this team is so young and so like moldable. I think at this point, they're they need that. Listen, Brendan Gallagher is not going anywhere. His contract is not going anywhere, and he's not going anywhere. Which, like, honestly, if any guy deserves to have a little bit of slack and like retire a Hab, I think it's him. I think he deserves it at this point. But I think for him to kind of he's been the heartbeat of this team before. And I'm glad he didn't have to like take that. And I'm glad we didn't have to rely on him today. But I do think that like with the team this young, you've seen kind of what can happen in the locker room in the other direction and kind of we've heard about that, but for us I feel like we're because there's no expectations and there's just playing for each other. When their relationship is so strong, that's when we see the best hockey, which is like power of friendship, really. So like what are your what's your read on how the identity of both these teams on just a personnel level has kind of led them to where they are right now? Asking you to talk shit about the Rangers. You're not going to, but
So
I'm asking you to.
no, I am. This is one of the things I talk about quite frequently is that
Yeah.
the Rangers don't think ahead when they make decisions.
Yeah.
They are only captivated by the latest shiny object. Right now, that's JT Miller. Last year, it was Jake Gensel until it wasn't. The year before that, it was Patrick Kane. The year before that, it was Vincent Trocheck. The year before that, it was Ryan Reeves and Barclay Goodrow. The Rangers don't think about the long-term ramifications of the decisions they make. JT Miller had 100 points last year. He's also going to be 32 years old in a month. And you're
Yeah.
telling me you're going to build this team around a 32-year-old Vincent Trocheck, a 32-year-old JT Miller, and a 33-year-old Mika Zibanejad, a 34-year-old Panarin, a 32-year-old Chris Kreider. From that perspective, I definitely think the Rangers haven't really, from a organizational perspective, they haven't put enough of an emphasis on forging that identity. They've really, if anything, they've tried to import other people's credibility. I mentioned
Mhm.
Barclay Goodrow and Ryan Reeves, guys who had been on team, in Goodrow's case, won Stanley Cups, Reeves's case, guys who'd been to a Stanley Cup and trying to look for a shortcut. They never really put the team, they never really made the identity of the team the way the Habs have around their young guys. You think
Mhm.
about it, and you want to talk about Jeff Gordon later. The Rangers had that opportunity where they could have oriented the team around Capo Caco, around Filipino, Ryan Lindgren, Adam Fox, Igor Shesterkin, and kind of waited and slow
Yeah.
played it a little bit more. And instead, they traded for Trouba, they signed Panarin as a free agent, and they immediately accelerated that clock. And that
Yeah.
2019-2020 Rangers team, they got into the expanded playoff, which gave everybody a false sense of entitlement that they'd accomplished something, which they
Mhm.
didn't. They got swept out by Carolina. They came
Yeah.
back the next year. They had a season from hell where Zibanejad had long COVID and was atrocious. That's his worst season as a pro.
Yeah.
Panarin had to
Fair
take that
enough.
2 or 3 Panarin had to take that 2 or 3 week leave of absence because of the stuff with his family in Russia. They had the Tom
Mhm.
Wilson thing. The general manager, president, and the head coach all got fired in the span of a week and a half. And we are where we are now because of those decisions. Whereas the Habs, I think part of the reason the Jeff Gorton thing has worked for them, or at least in theory has worked for them, is
Yeah.
they have oriented this team around Nick Suzuki, around Uri
Mhm.
Slafkovsky, around Cole Caulfield. They have been very patient. They have said, we know that we have a long-term plan. Even a few weeks ago, I remember Ken Hughes saying, we might be having a decent season right now, but this doesn't alter what our long-term plan is, because they have a plan, they have a course of action, and they want to stick to it. They're not getting
Mhm.
enticed by the shiny object. I was talking about it with one of my friends last week because he saw where the Habs were in the standings. He's like, "Do you think they would add if they were close?" And I was like, "I wouldn't. Even
Yeah.
if you get in, you're going to be Florida or Carolina, the Devils, Washington, and
Yeah.
round one. That's a tall order. You don't do that for
Mhm.
one season. What the
Yeah.
Habs are doing, I believe in what the Habs are doing.
Mhm.
Ultimately, it matters whether or not it works, but
Yeah.
the theory and what they are doing, I believe, is the way you're supposed to do this.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I think there's the like hitting fast forward on a rebuild that
Yeah.
I think so many teams fall victim to, which sucks because you're already kind of halfway there. Um, so now you've taken that time and it's like it's just nobody's had a good time. You've now promised your players who were there during that rebuild process that they would get something out of it because obviously guys don't want to stay in a place that's perpetually losing. I can think of a few places right now, but I won't say them. Buffalo. But I think then when you have that, but then the results aren't coming because you didn't do the rebuild right. So now you have guys who were there when it was really bad and they were being told it's going to be good eventually, and it's still not reached good, you know? So I think there's like there that creates some sort of like resentment, some sort of weird like internal politics. We Habs fans aren't unfamiliar with the concept of a locker room who that isn't the most I don't know. I would say that maybe electing Max Pacioretty into being captain was not the best decision back when it happened. So I think like we aren't unfamiliar with that concept. But let's kind of let's take that and let's talk a little bit about some players that we really were hoping to see that jump from and that improvement in, and we just haven't we didn't or we were told we weren't seeing it. You know what I mean? I think a big market like Montreal, the media can almost be more impatient than the fans, and then it's turned around on the fans. So I think there was a narrative that was Kirby Doc and Slavkovsky, and then there was Kirby Doc and Slavkovsky. Neither of who were perfect, but I thought today the two of them had Slavkovsky specifically had a really good game. I'm looking at natural stat trick right. I'm looking there right now, and the Corsi for that line, Uri, Slavkovsky, Nick Suzuki, Cole Caulfield is 80%, which is really, really for it's a good number, guys, is how I'll say it. And it's just it looked like a really good line. It looked like the first line you need when the best fourth line in the league was one third of it was hit by a car and can't play right now. So what
Yeah,
were your feelings, yeah, on that line and those players specifically?
I think the way to make the Rangers uncomfortable and what that line did a nice job of, there's two things you can do. Number one, if you attack them with speed off the rush, they fold terribly because none of their defensemen are particularly adept in transition. And it's weird because, like, you look at K. Andre Miller and Will Borgen, and, like, on paper, 6'3, 6'4, tall, long reaches, big bodies, good skaters. And they just don't pick guys up in transition particularly well. They always start very deep in the neutral zone, don't give themselves a lot of room to defend. And then the other thing you can do is if you dump the puck in behind them and you make the Rangers defense turn around, go get it, they are very susceptible to being forechecked aggressively, where it's really hard to transition out of their own end. It's very easy to force them into turnovers. I mean, the one goal they had, Borgen threw that puck to the middle with no real intention of getting it to his
No
partner.
pressure, no any sort of time. Like he had so much he could have done there, and he just chose to eat it, I guess.
That's the thing. The Rangers get in their own head, in their own zone, and they make those mindless mistakes. Like you said, Borgen has 5, 10 feet of open ice in front of him. He can stop where he is and wait for Suzuki to keep going across. He can send it forward or he can skate forward. I always say there's two ways to get a puck where you want it to go. You can skate it or you can pass it. Flipping it, the long pass, all of that stuff is great. But focus on the basics. When you are a struggling team, when your defense is not good, it is actively hindering your team's ability to win games. You got to
Mhm.
dumb it down. And to your point, I thought Slavkovsky was really persistent. I thought the thing with those young guys that you really want to see is when a play doesn't go their way, do they stay engaged, or do
Yeah.
they immediately sulk their shoulders and kind of fade away from the play? If they
Mhm.
stay persistent, if they stay in the mix, and if they lose the initial battle, they re-engage, and even if they don't get it back, but they at least put pressure, that's the sign of a good line. And I thought Slavkovsky was really good on that tonight. I thought he was very noticeable. I thought he had a lot of energy. And sure, those are, surface level evaluations, takeaways from the game, but sometimes that's really all you want to see from those young guys is they are engaged and they are building. We all know development's not linear. We all
Yeah.
understand that there are good games and there are bad games. But if they're engaged, they're playing with energy, they're noticeable, that's at least a foundation. Then we can start talking about decision making, puck skills, the more detailed intricacies of the game. Are they
Mhm.
noticeable? Are they engaged? Are they making the other team work? And I thought Slavkovsky was really good at that tonight.
Yeah, yeah. I think he was really persistent to your point, and I really liked his attitude. I think that's one thing that like has been consistent in Slav. We've seen it once or twice. He's human, right? Like of course he's going to have bad nights where he just like doesn't he's really down on himself or whatever. But I think overall for the most part we've seen like a Slav who is very much next shift. Like I'll do better next shift, that's it. Next play, I'll do better. And I think even if the actual like results aren't always there, I'm really encouraged by Slav's kind of attitude. I'm not like putting any sort of I'm not putting any player down for how they respond to things. Some guys just have a harder time bouncing back. But what you want is a guy who can bounce back, and you want a guy who's like just able to brush himself off and go, okay, I'll just go again. Yeah, sure, I'm on the ground, but I'll get back up and I'll just keep going. And I really, really like that in Slav. I think before we got on, we were talking, or I mentioned very briefly, is like the concept of Slav's development, I guess, like you said, hasn't been linear at all. I think people, it's his sophomore year. People will say it's his third. It's not because the first was like he was out, basically. He got injured and he was out. Um, so it's his sophomore year. He's not, people were expecting like a very upward trajectory. He, immediately topping the points he had last game or last season. And he's on pace to do well, but not a significant increase. And I think like I think there's something to be said about having the patience with a player like that, especially a high pick, which you as a Rangers fan kind of know about. So, like where are you at with that in terms of we both are talking about Lafreniere, so or I am anyway. So
It's a good topic. It's something we're going to talk about tomorrow on our show on Liberty Blue because I had somebody DM me yesterday. Can you explain why the Rangers are incapable of developing any type of young forward talent? Because everybody just looks at the box score and sees what Kako's doing in Seattle and is kind of pissed that he's been a point per game player since getting there. And
yeah.
at best, he was a half a point player as a Ranger. And I think the biggest thing for these young guys is you want to see the ice time and the responsibilities they get.
Mhm.
Because the biggest indicator of eventual counting stat goals and assist success is ice time. There's a reason that we see players ages 28, 29, 30, 31. That's typically when guys reach their counting stat peak because that's when they have the highest reputation. They've accomplished a lot. Teams are willing to trust them. That's typically when they're going to be paid the most. So teams, because you're
Yeah.
paying them the most, they're going to be more inclined to give you more responsibility because they want you to produce those counting stats. And look, Slavkovsky, he's playing a little bit less per game this year than he did last year. I don't know off the top of my head if that's power play, kill, or if that's even strength, but the biggest thing is ice time. If you want a guy to have 60, 70, 80 points, he's got to be playing 21, 22 minutes a night. He's got to be on the first power play. He's got to have an important role on the first power play. It's not
Mhm.
just enough to be the net front guy, the bumper guy. You want to be the trigger man, you want to be the facilitator, what have you. For Lafreniere, I mean, he's never really gotten until last season, he never really had extended run in the top six where it was, this is your job. Prior
Mhm.
to last year, it was always, we're going to see how it goes. He'd do it for a week or two, and they would go to Barclay Goodrow, or they would go to Blake Wheeler, or they would go to Capo Caco, or
Mhm.
another forward on the team. Because the Rangers were so, as you said before, the idea of speed running the rebuild, they were so enamored with the idea of, we're right here. We're right here. All we got to do is small marginal increases and we can
Mhm.
do this. And
Mhm.
because they were constantly chasing that, they ultimately put themselves in a situation where they never really turned the team over or gave those guys enough of a chance to really find their games. Capo Caco got drafted 6 years ago at this point, and
Yeah.
I still don't really know what he is as an NHL player.
Mhm.
Lafreniere, the 2020 draft in September, October of 2020, he comes in after not playing hockey for 8 to 10 months because of the pandemic shutdown. He plays 50 games on an atrocious team coached by a lame duck coach who gets fired. They bring in a new coach, new GM, and the GM is the president as well. And they tell Lafreniere, you're going to start the year on the third line. You're going to play with Hedel and Kako. Ultimately, that line plays okay. But it has been a long, winding road because they've been blocked and the organization has been unwilling to. And this is something I think the Habs do a really good job of. The Rangers have been unwilling to let their young guys make mistakes.
Yeah.
Same thing. You think about Zach Jones, who is undoubtedly one of their six best defensemen, but he can't get in the lineup because the
Mhm.
style he plays is volatile, it's risky, and a coach would rather play Vakanainen, who is nothing remarkable. He's a average NHL defenseman, but would rather find out if Zach Jones is an NHL player or not, as
Yeah.
opposed to Vakanainen, who's 26, 27, and has less than 100 career games played. That's the thing I will always say that I've appreciated about Marty St. Louis as the Habs coach and as the organization. They're willing to let them make mistakes. They're willing to let them mess up and say, it's okay. You made a
Yeah.
mistake. You'll go back out there the next shift and you'll do a better job. And
Yeah.
I think that's really important when we are talking about these young guys because for so many of them, their confidence gets cooked because you think about it. If you're Alexis Lafreniere, from the time you were probably 19 years old, you were the best player on every single team
Yeah.
you played on. You
Yeah.
were always the guy that was depended on. And then you get to the national and you're playing 13, 14 minutes a night. You don't get on the power play. You can't get on the penalty kill. And they're telling you, don't make any mistakes. And you can't be creative. You can't find your game at the NHL level when you're constantly being told, just play it safe. And that's really the problem the Rangers have had with their young guys. He had a great playoffs last year, best season of his career. He got paid off of it. We'll see if he ends up getting traded for JT Miller or not. I don't think that would be a good
The
idea,
chat
but
was asking about that. We'll get to that in overtime, guys. So, your questions will be answered.
yes, definitely. I have so many thoughts about the JT Miller thing. But to tie a bow on this thought, there's no exact right way to do this. If there was, everyone would do it.
Yeah.
This is more of an art than a science. But I think what the Habs do, I think what to a lesser extent what the Sharks are doing right now,
Mhm.
let those young guys figure it out. The team's going to be bad anyway. You might as well let them figure it out so you know what they are. Because by the
Yeah.
time a player is 24, 25 years old, you need to know what they are at that point because that's when it comes time to start giving out serious, real money. And if
Yeah.
you don't know what a player is at that point, you're kind of screwed because you either have to take the risk on paying them
Mhm.
or you let them go and they go on to greener pastures.
Yeah, and then all your fans are mad forever.
Yeah.
Yeah, and totally understandable. I think kind of what you said about Trinka ads, it's like Marty says, you got to get your touches. And I think, yeah,
Yeah.
that's pretty much that's how you develop as a player. But kind of what you said about letting them make mistakes. I think one place that this has been super critical has been the defense group. It's a little obviously it's not with the we're talking about Slav, but like it's a very young defense group too. Lane Hudson has adjusted really well, but he's made mistakes. And frankly, he's been on ice while Mike Matheson made mistakes and he didn't know how to deal with them because Mike Matheson is a adventure at like I'm on team, by the way, for those watching, I am on team. We got to be nicer to Mike Matheson, but also God, Mike, just play better sometimes. Um, but yeah, like you said about like letting them make mistakes, I think we kind of saw this a little bit in Arbor. In when he was sent down, he was playing one of the like some of the best hockey he played, but he was sent down to Laval last year at some point. And I think at that point, what they were disciplining him for wasn't mistakes he was making on ice in terms of like his defensive play. I think they were more just like giving him a lesson about um discipline and giving him a lesson about you can't do the things you've been doing. And this year he's been a lot better. He's been a good boy TM. Like he didn't pick that fight with Rempe until Rempe like hit him, right? Like and I think like frankly I didn't want him to get into that fight because he's an important player. We want him on the ice and Rempe doesn't play that much. So it's I think that's what I've been really impressed by is the balance of um a guy being for example, earlier this season, God, it's felt like 4 different seasons the way it's been going for the Habs. But earlier this season, there was a game that like Slav got benched in essentially for the last period. And it was a moment of like, Marty was like, I'm playing to win right now. I'm trying to get this team going. And he just wasn't helping. So I'm going to sit him. But next game, we're not demoting him to the third line. We're not doing anything like that. This is just a moment where I had to show where it wasn't even about showing giving him a lesson. It was more just we got to play with what we have right now. And then the next game, everything's forgiven. Slav's playing better. It's just I really enjoy that dynamic of a coach. You know, for Marty, for all his issues, I think I really just appreciate the way that he has a relationship with his players. I think it's really special, and I think in this period, I don't know where he'll be by the time that we are super competitive. But right now, at least, he is the best possible coach for this team, I think. Um, I know that everybody's reaction when he first got hired was what the fuck. It was my reaction too. So like I want to get your opinions on Marty St. Louis a little bit, but first I would like to talk to everybody and let them know to please like the video if you're enjoying our discussion if you're enjoying the mustache on stream, which you are getting lots of compliments on, by the way. So if you're enjoying our content, please be sure to like our video. We are slaves to the algorithm, as everybody knows. Um, I would also just like to really quickly touch on one of our lovely sponsors. We have Inchubichu as one of our sponsors. We're so excited to tell you about our new partner here at Game Over Montreal specifically. They do witchy, gothy, glam jewelry. They've got subtle pieces. They've got like bespoke, like big silver pieces. It's really cool stuff. Again, I say this every single ad read, but I can't wait to go whenever I'm in Montreal. Um, they are located in the Chateau Saint Ambrosia, I think. Inchubichu also runs seasonal themed markets. Be sure to drop by. It's right next to actually our next sponsor, the Saint Motel, and say hi to Astrid and the team. And you can find out more about Inchubichu on, I'm sure we'll have the link in our description, but it is Inchu, INCHOOBIJOUX. I've had spelling related issues here on this podcast.com. So be sure to check them out if you can. And I'd also like to tell you a little bit about Les Saint Motel. So they're like a selfie studio. I know people like roll their eyes at that sometimes, but I think it's a really cool um, kind of place to just hang out and spend time and make memories with your friends. Again, as somebody who loves Montreal whenever I've visited, it's a good place to make memories. So do you want to take some awesome promotional pictures for your business as well? We've got setups for that. So check out Lake Saint Motel in Montreal Southwest. It's an amazing selfie studio located in Montreal's historic Chateau Saint Ambrosia, adjacent to Inchu Bichu. They boast 12 plus unique decors. You can kind of hop in the ball pit, the heart-shaped ball pit, or go back to Expo 67. They got some really cool stuff. They'll come to you with setup and take down. So head to Lake Saint Motel, LE Saint, SAINT, Motel, MOTEL.com for more details. And they're constantly swapping in decors and props and stuff like that. So be sure to check them out on their website. So I'm gonna change our kind of into period two, but springing this on you, but Marty St. Louis, thoughts, feelings, opinions?
So Marty St. Louis, the player, will always hold a special place
Well,
in my
yes,
heart.
yes.
His moonlight as a Ranger at the end was really fun. One of the more memorable short-term Rangers of guys who were here for less than 100 games. But as a coach, like you said, initially when they announced that hire, I remember I was on a train into the city. I believe I was going to a Ranger game that night, and I read it like 6 times because I was like, Marty St. Louis is not an assistant coach. He's not in the
Yeah.
AHL. What is his experience? And I remember seeing the follow-up of he's been coaching his kids' youth team in Connecticut for the last year and a half, and nodding and contemplating what that means for like the direction of coaching going forward, whatever. And everything he has said is the stuff I generally believe is the way you want to manage a young team. And look, as I said before with player development, there's no one way to do everything. And one of the really important things in today's game, and I think it is a beneficiary when you hire a guy who isn't as far removed from playing or is just on the younger side. And I think our generation of people is better with this is you need to be understand that every single player on your team is different, and the type of relationship you foster with each of them needs to be different. You can't expect what works for one guy to work with someone else. And some guys, they need you to be on them and to ride them and make it difficult for them. And other guys, they just want the paddle on the back and it's okay, you'll get them next time. And I feel, at least from the outside looking in, that Marty does a good job of that, of knowing what each of his guys need and finding ways to kind of just foster and bring them along. And it's been my biggest critique of the Rangers over the last handful of seasons is they keep doing the mercenary coach thing. They don't put a coach in place who's going to manage to foster those relationships. And it just lends itself to what I was saying before in terms of trying to import credibility. You know, Gallant went to a cup final with Vegas, got fired 3 years into that. They went to Laviolette, who's had a really nice track record. You know, he's one of the most winningest coaches in the history of the sport. He also, you know, tends to burn out very quickly because he's typically coaching these veteran-laden teams that have really high expectations. And when you don't meet those expectations, you get fired. But as far as Marty, I think that's what you want right now. And you said it before. I don't know what his long-term prospects are as
Mhm.
coach of the Canadiens in terms of when they'll be competitive again. But I think as far as and this is more of an idea you see in the soccer world, but the idea of the caretaker manager, the caretaker coach, who they know they're probably not going to be in charge when that team is championship caliber, but they have a reputation for fostering good relationships, building good habits. And I think that's so important when you're as young as the Canadians are, is all of those guys understanding what it means to be a pro, how we play as a team. And I think that's really important when you're building it along, because you look at the places where this goes bad, like Buffalo. You can make an
Hmm.
argument that it's going bad like that in Chicago right now. You can make an argument like Ottawa, like Detroit, where you just perpetually throw band-aids on problems. You don't really address them. And then you kind of stick your hands up and why aren't we winning hockey games? Well, you just kept throwing guys at the problem instead of trying to build pieces up. And I think ultimately, the Habs are going to have to start being more aggressive as time goes on. They can't keep hanging on to this young guy thing forever. But for where they're at right now, I think this is pretty much exactly what you want.
Yeah, yeah. I think kind of what you said about a team or a coach who has a good relationship with his players is that reminds me of the Slavkovsky versus Kirby Doc situation where Doc was struggling, and I think he's been so good recently. Like it's been great seeing the improvement. I think he's needed it. Um, but I think Slav was like out here in the media being like, yeah, Kent Hughes pulled me aside and was like, you can do better. Like he was very open about that. Whereas I think like if Kirby Doc I don't think like he was in the right place for that, which like frankly he's back from a bad injury. I haven't been the easiest on Kirby Doc. I can admit that. It's been frustrating. I think that's been a moment of like you said about oh, I need to see what this guy is because he was being played on the wing, but we're depending on him to be the 2C. So I was like, if he's struggling, let him play through it. Like we need to see what he is because a 2C is something that we want to take care of eventually, right? Like I follow the Avs a lot and like right now they've got one of the best centers in the world. And they're struggling because their 2C is struggling a little bit. Now there's a lot of other things happening there, but that's something that I saw go down. 2Cs aren't easy to find. They're not inexpensive. So that was my thought with Kirby was I want to find out what he is. But now he's getting himself together, which good for him. That you always are cheering for that. I feel like people accuse other fans of like being cheering against a player or like, oh, you never wanted this guy to succeed. That's never it. It's never that. It's always just, I'm always very clear with my critiques of players of being like, it's not a being kind to him. It's not a decision on his character. It's not anything like that. But at the end of the day, this is a hockey team, and we do want players who can win. Um, and all of that to say is Kirby's doing great. I thought that line Alex Newhook is so fast. He is such a fast little dude. And I think I'd forgotten that until like there were so many times where he just broke up plays and he came back and that was so nice to see. Um I'm just really liking what our young group is doing. Like I like you said, it's not I don't know where the future is right now, but I feel good about it. I think this is a time where I'm trying to let myself be as happy as possible because things are only going to get more stressful from here. Because as expectations build, you hold your breath more and more as playoffs come. Obviously, I'd love to be in the playoffs this year. I honestly love it if they were just fighting to the last game. I think that's something that our friend Ian Boer on Locked On Canadians talks about all the time is I want to see a team that's playing for something. And I think that's so important. Like we have this discussion, we're kind of circling back to it, so I'm sorry, but the culture discussion. I think hockey fans, like very online hockey fans, tend to be very dismissive of culture. And I just don't think that's a very again, we're humans. It culture affects us at any job. You if you hate the way that the people at your job are, it's not going to work out for you. You're on a sports team, like even just like for fun, you're not going to like it if the culture isn't good. They're human. Of course it's going to affect culture is going to affect them. So to me, I'm really excited about what they're building. I'm excited about this culture. I'm excited about guys who you know, uh, gotta get my Caden Gooley mention in. I thought he was great today. I think he made some great plays. I know that first, what was it? The first one, the weird bounce, was not a great one, but I think that was a bounce more than anything. And I will be defending him no matter what. So nobody be mean in the chat. So to me, it's more that like I just I like seeing this team go for something, like want something, and not settle for. I think at the start of the season, like I said, this season has been like 4 seasons in one. And I would say the first 2 seasons of the of the 4 seasons were like me just being like, well, this team is screwed. We're picking bottom five again. Time to, start talking to my scout friends so I can book them for the show. Like it was like I was in full that kind of mode. You know, what what are your thoughts on a situation like this where at this point I don't think it's useful to try to bottom out anymore. I think that'd be like artificially hurting this team, trying to do something that would like tank or whatever. But I know that like most Habs fans are at the place where they're like, okay, we don't want to tank anymore. This team has proven that it's not ready to tank. But there's always people who are saying you could still use another good player. And who can't? Everybody can use a good player. But I don't think that's the useful route to go down. So kind of I don't agree with that way of thinking. How do you feel about that?
It's one of those cases where the MBA, like the letter M as in macadamia nut, the MBA style of thinking is you think about it in terms of probabilities and odds. If you add more good players, the better your chances of being a good team are. I personally think the Habs are too talented to pick top five. I think they're
Hmm.
better than the teams that are at the bottom of the standings. And like you said, you would kind of have to artificially manufacture that where they would have to trade off some guys ahead of the deadline, whether that's Jake Evans, if that's Matheson, Savard, whatever, as far as just making the team a little bit worse. But I think where the Habs are now, and to your point, I think it would really benefit them to play meaningful hockey because you want to start putting these guys in positions to see how they respond to that. Because for some of them, they've never been there. For some of them who were on the team that went to the Cup final, they have some immersion. They understand that feeling.
I think having
But
your
for
captain who was there has been really important. I think Suzuki being there was it has been good for that. But yeah, I cut you off.
No, you're fine. You're fine. It does matter because at a certain point, and you'll hear players say this all the time, they don't care. They don't care about the draft. Some of those guys aren't going to be on the team next year. They don't
Yes.
care if they can get James Hagens on the team next year. Some of the guys on the team won't be here. So it doesn't matter to them. For them, it's about, I need to play well enough that I can get another contract that I can stay in the NHL. And for a team where the Habs are, where they have done the brunt of the hard work,
Yeah.
they've taken their medicine for of several seasons in a row now, and they have been
And it was not
actively
good. It
no,
was
it's
not
not.
good.
And when you do that for too long, you start to drain the life force from the guys on the team. And I hate to keep going back to Buffalo and to a lesser extent Chicago, but the guys on that Sabres team, they have so much talent between Darlene and Power and Thompson and Tuck and Dylan Cousins. They have so much talent on that team, and it doesn't even matter. They can't realize that talent in actuality, so it doesn't really matter that they've picked
Hmm.
so highly over and over and over again. And sure, you can have discourse about whether Montreal never really got the slam dunk, home run, whatever word you want to use to describe it, first overall pick. They didn't drop Nathan McKinnon or Sid or McDavid onto this team. But for what Slavkovsky is so far, that is malleable. They can keep working on that. Eventually, yeah, they are going to need to start being better because then you start to have the conversations of, well, if young guy X and young guy Y aren't working here, what can we turn them into? I do
Hmm.
think the time will come where Montreal will start to trade some of their defenseman prospects because they have so many of them. And I think ultimately, and Jeff Gorton did this as Rangers general manager as well, you just want to throw as many darts at the wall as possible and hope that two or three of them stick. The Rangers drafted
Hmm.
something like 11 defensemen in a 3-year window, and like two of them turned out to be good NHLers. So it is a really hard thing to do, but I think to your point, to tie a bow on this line of conversation, I think the Habs are too good to bottom out. I don't
Hmm.
think they're in that tier with like the Sharks, with I can't even say Columbus, but with Chicago, the Sharks, Anaheim, Buffalo. I think they're too good for that at this point. I,
No,
I
yeah.
don't think they would get there without something weird happening. If there's more injuries, different conversation. But where they are right now, I think they're too good for that.
Yeah. I did a so I put together the all the picks that the Rangers made in the Gorton. era, which thank you to Hockey Reference. And I'm looking here, they drafted 15 defensemen between 2016 and 2021. And out of them, it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7 who played any games at all. And there's like 2 games, 4 games, 2 games.
Yeah.
Some of them are like definitely fresher.
Andre Miller and Schneider are the only two that are defensemen they've drafted of note. You know, Zach Jones has played a handful of games.
Lundqvist, I
Nils
think.
Lundqvist has they on the Stars, yeah. He's played more games for Dallas. He only played like 20
Was
games as a
he
Ranger.
yeah,
And they
yeah.
traded him to Dallas for I think the 20-somethingth pick 2 years ago before the season started. They like I said, they drafted a bunch of them, and it ultimately came down to, do we want Braden Schneider or do we want Nils Lundqvist? And they picked Schneider, and they traded Nils to Dallas. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Man, that's one of the things I think is the trades. Again, I will shift into a conversation about Gorton in a minute, but I do have to get my, just for my own sake, Dobesh. Not his best game, but over time we needed that, and he made the saves he needed to for overtime. But I think one thing that I'm really impressed by with Dobesh, and goalies are so, you know and I was impressed by the fact that he was able to put himself back together. I think by the end of the first, we saw like him like actively look dejected at the end. I think I saw actually Nick Suzuki go over once the buzzer hit 0. He went over and like kind of comforted him, which again, great to see from your captain. You want to see that, but you don't want to see you're nervous when you see a goalie who needs that. But he was able to put himself back together. I don't think the second was best either, but he made the saves when they needed the saves. I think with a team like this, as young as they are, with the back-to-back, things have spiraled so easily in the past. We saw the 7 against last game. Things just snowball, and I'm just proud of him for not letting that snowball. I think, also, sorry, let me just get on this soapbox. Guys, we gotta relax about Monty. Please stop it. We need to get it together. Dobesh is not the starter because he's played 5 games in the NHL. He is a very good goalie. We want to see him do better. We want all those things, but he is not the starter. Monty has not lost his net. He's had a bad game. He's had some inconsistencies, but what goalie doesn't? It's good now that we have a goalie who we can, a backup that we can play, because Primo was not getting into any games, and we just got to be careful, guys. Guys, be normal, please. Monty is a good goalie who struggled last game. He saved our ass before. So, in conclusion, please be normal about goalies. It is a position that is not, it's inconsistent. Don't turn on Dobesh when he has a bad game. Don't turn on him. Today he had like bad-ish game and they won, so nobody's going to turn on him. But if he had a bad-ish game and they lost, people would be really weird about it. So, I just got to remind people to please calm down about Dobesh and be nice to Monty. Guys, he looks a bit like a toddler. He has nice pink face. He's snacks. We got to be nice to him because otherwise we'll have people from Alberta saying that he was a diversity hire in 4 nations, essentially, which hilarious, but not how hockey works. There's plenty of nepotism, but I do not think it's for one French Canadian on the team. So let me get it out of the way. Strike check, I want to say. I don't think that's fair. I don't think Monty is a dog shit goalie. I think that's a little bit of an exaggeration. Chaka Monster says here that, how are we defending Monty? He's a career sub 900. Well, first of all, my bad. First of all, he was playing very injured with his wrist all fucked up in his first year in Montreal. He was a favorite pickup. The team was terrible. I'm not claiming he's like the next coming of Carey Price, but as I said, we got to be a little bit more level-headed about this thing. Monty is nearing 30, correct? We have we're waiting on Fowler. We have Dobesh coming. Sorry, Nick, I just had to go off on this. It's such a entire discussion to have about like goalies, just the constant swing, the shiny new toy syndrome, all these things that is just, we just got to be nicer, guys. At the end of the day, sorry, I repeat that 15 times, but that's how I feel. Um, so I think Nick and I are going to get into the discussion about Jeff Gorton, because I sprung this question on Andrew last time we were on together about how do you feel? How do you feel about Jeff Gorton, considering what we're seeing in New York? And his kind of conclusion to that was, he was like, I'm not worried because Kent Hughes is there. That's a weird kind of question, like in terms of what do either of them do. Lots of people, I asked this on Twitter, I asked this on Blue Sky, and lots of people kind of, their answer came down to it's more mentor mentee situation, but we will circle back to that. Let's just start. Jeff Gorton, feelings?
So it's a very complicated question. They nurtured him along for a few years as the assistant general manager to Glenn Sather, who had been in the organization since the late 90s. Glenn Sather, coached the Oilers back in the day, won all the cups, lifelong, played for the Rangers as a player, fostered a relationship with the owner of the team when he was a kid. And James Dolan remembered that his entire life, that Glenn Sather was nice to him when he was a kid, and that connection has been there. Glenn Sather was still a figure in the organization as recently as a year and a half ago. And as far as Jeff, I think he was dealt a difficult hand because
Mhm.
they went to the Cup final in 14, they went to the conference final in 15, and then they had a brain drain. They lost Carl Hagelin, they lost Anton Strawman, they lost Brian Boyle, they traded Cam Talbot as well. All of that was Jeff Gorton's first offseason as general manager. They were up at the cap ceiling, and they were a team that had gone to as far as you can go with the guys they had, and they had to make calculated risks. And the risks ultimately put them on a course where they needed to course correct eventually. In 15-16, they lose to the Penguins in 5. 16-17, they beat Montreal in round 1. They lose to Ottawa, and that Ottawa team, as we all recall, was Mark Stone, Erik Karlsson. That was really it. And Erik Karlsson on one leg was good enough to beat the Rangers in 6 games. And that prompted the Rangers to kind of look around at the debris of that team and say, we are kind of capped out. We need to start transitioning younger. They trade Derek Stepan at the draft that year for Tony DeAngelo and a pick from Arizona. They start transitioning younger. They trade Brassard for Mika Zibanejad. That's the year before. That's the summer of 2016 into 2017. But that's where they start the transition. And then 2017, 2018 is the inflection point. That's the year they really blow it up. And you ask a Ranger fan, what do you think about Jeff Gorton? The first thing they'll tell you is, well, he traded JT Miller and Ryan McDonough for Brett Howden, Libor Hayek, and draft picks. And Brett Howden is a third line center on Vegas, and Libor Hayek is out of the NHL. Those
Yeah,
draft
I
picks, they
trolled
burn.
I looked at Reddit a little bit just to get like the average online fans' opinion on that, and that was one thing that kept coming on the GT Miller trade specifically. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, JT Miller's a 100-point player who has the snarl and the edge and the toughness that the hockey men love. He's very clearly a difficult person to work with, being that Tampa Bay and Vancouver have both and the Rangers, mind you, have all looked at him and been like, I don't think we want this guy here anymore.
Yeah.
He's kind of
Yeah.
tanking the vibes, and you have that. And then the ultimate problem with evaluating Jeff Gorton, and why I am a lot more ambiguous about about him than other people are, the messaging about what happened in 2021 as to why everybody got fired. There are multiple narratives out there in the wild. There's the
Mhm.
perception, and if you want to believe the official narrative, which is what people will tell you, is, well, coming into 2021, and mind you, this is a team that on opening night was dressing Jack Johnson on its second pair with Brendan Smith playing on his offside. They are going
That's
to tell you that,
Stanley Cup winner Jack Johnson to you.
yes, Stanley Cup winner Jack Johnson to me. Yes, correct. They are going to tell you that the owner's expectation was that team was going to make the playoffs. They are
Yeah.
going to tell you the year they picked the year after they picked Alexis Lafreniere
Insane.
first overall, they are going to tell you the official narrative is that David Quinn, Jeff Gorton, and John Davidson all got fired because that team which was not very talented, which was playing Tony DeAngelo, Adam Fox, Libor Hayek, Brendan Smith, Lindgren, Keandre Miller. Rookie Braden Schneider got a handful of games. Shesterkin has difficult first, I won't say full because it was only a 56-game season, but doesn't have the best season. And the season ends with the Tom Wilson thing. That's the second or third to last game of the year. And
Mhm.
I
Can you
personally
just, for
subscribe.
those who don't know, kind of just briefly explain what the Tom Wilson thing is? It's very
So
consequential.
yes. So the Rangers are a bad team. They're 9, 10 points out of the last playoff spot in that 56-game season. They have 3 games left in the regular season. They're playing Washington. Kreider's out of the lineup. Trouba's out of the lineup. There's one other regular who's not playing in that game who maybe would have been in the fight if something happened there. But there's a scrum after a whistle. And Tom Wilson is, if I recall correctly, he's kind of jabbing his stick at the goalie. I forget if it was Shesterkin or Georgiev, but he was jabbing his stick at the goalie. And Panarin jumped on his back. And, Panarin's significantly smaller than Tom Wilson. It looked like a small child getting a piggyback ride. And Tom Wilson threw him off of him. And then Wilson drove his stick into the back of Panarin's neck on the ice.
Very
And
normal. Very normal. That's
Buchnevich
guys should do. Yep.
And
Sorry.
Buchnevich came. No, you're fine. Buchnevich came over and cross-checked Tom Wilson back, and then there was a massive scrum after that. And the Rangers wrote a letter where they said they don't trust George Peros as the head of the Department of Player Safety, and the NHL should be embarrassed that star players get treated like this. And then the Rangers lost that game. The next game starts with a line brawl because they played back-to-back games. The Rangers send out, I think it was Kevin Rooney, Ryan Lindgren, and Brendan Smith. They have the entirely symbolic, inconsequential fight after the thing
Yeah.
already happened. And after that, the coach gets fired. The general manager the general manager and president of hockey operations, they both get fired. They play one more game. David Quinn gets fired after that. Chris Drury becomes the general manager and the president of hockey operations. They wait a few weeks. They hire Gerard Gallant. If you subscribe to the official theory that the team that was playing actively bad players was expected to make the playoffs, I understand why, because that's the official narrative. But I fully believe that they were embarrassed that Panarin got thrown around like that, and it was an excuse to get rid of everyone. That they were
Yeah.
unhappy with how slow and how long it was taking. The Rangers didn't make the playoffs for 3.5 years after making the playoffs 8 of 9 years. And when
Mhm.
you make as much money as the Rangers do, they get used to that, and they
Yeah.
didn't like that
Yeah.
they missed the playoffs for that many years in a row. I'm personally a believer the owner just overreacted to what was an Yeah, was that embarrassing? Yes, it shouldn't have happened. Somebody should have gone over there and did something about it, but no one did, and we are living with the aftermath of that. So I I am a little more bullish on Jeff Gorton's tenure as president of the Rangers than other people, because I think he was put in a almost impossible situation where you can't tell someone the expectations are this and then they're not, because it's
Mhm.
fundamentally unrealistic to say that was the goal for that team. That team wasn't good
Yeah.
enough to make the playoffs.
Yeah. That just objectively seems a little ridiculous when you think about it like that. I think for me, let's talk about it this way because there's ambiguity there, yeah. But
Yeah.
what to you, what was a moment that you were like, specifically about Jeff Gordon, that you were like, in that moment, not overall big picture, specifically that moment that you were like, that is not a good decision that you made. I
Oh,
would guess
trading
it was some sort of
JT
trade.
trading JT Miller and Ryan McDonough for throw-ins.
Yeah,
The perception, it was a running joke online that if Steve Yzerman calls you, you hang up the phone. You do not
yeah,
accept Steve Yzerman's call
yeah,
because you are about to get fleeced. Because, and I say this about every sport, if there is a team that consistently churns out good roster players at the professional level from their minor league system, and they are willing to trade you guys from their development system, those guys aren't good. Because
yeah,
if they were good, you look at all of the guys Tampa Bay has turned over in the window from Yzerman to Brisebois, where you talk about even tertiary guys, like look what they've done with Brandon Hagel in his
yeah,
time in Tampa Bay. You talk about guys like Tony Cirelli and Point, who they manufactured. Those guys, they did their time in the AHL. They fixed Braden Point's stride, where he's one of the defining players of this window.
yeah,
And I could have told you the moment that trade happened and I saw Howden, Hayek, and I know there was some conjecture about, well, the Rangers were trying to get Sergachev and they wouldn't trade him Sergachev, whatever.
Wow,
You don't get credit.
Sergachev in terms of a trade, we would not
Yeah.
know anything about that.
No, the Habs wouldn't know anything about that, but that's really the thing. You don't trade. You never were going to win a trade with Tampa Bay. You weren't,
Yeah.
especially for prospects, especially for prospects, because prospects are fickle. And as the main point of this entire conversation we've been having is development's not linear. Just
No.
because someone is good in one place doesn't mean they're going to be good somewhere else, and vice versa. And the Rangers have really struggled with that for most of the 21st century. You go and look at all of the draft picks and all of the players they've taken since 2000 and just the inconsequential volume of guys. Lundqvist was a 7th round pick. Shesterkin was a 4th round pick. Beyond that, we're talking about Chris Kreider and JT Miller as their 2 best draft picks of the century. That's all they have to show for it. And look, obviously they've had good guys. Derek Stepan, really good player. Keandre Miller, pretty good. Schneider, pretty good. Lafreniere, Hedel. But no elite guys, no face of the franchise type players they've drafted this century as far as skaters. Goalies, yeah. The goalie sauce is magic. And
It really is.
one day Ranger fans are going to understand the misery of being on the goalie carousel again. And I hope it never happens. But the way people talk about Shesterkin, you would think he was a bum. You would think he was a total sieve the way Ranger fans talk about him, where he
Really?
lets up one goal. He lets up one goal that's kind of meh. And it's an entire referendum on the 7-year extension. It's maddening. He's the one player who you could say has performed at his level this year. But sorry to totally go aside, but the
No,
big
no, I
picture,
asked. I asked.
as far as the Gorton stuff, he was dealt a difficult position. I'll give him credit for being able to facilitate convincing the owner of the team that they needed to rebuild the team, because not everybody has the conviction to do that.
No.
You look at what's going on in Boston right now and how many times Don Sweeney could have pulled the ejection hatch over the last handful of seasons and say, we need to take a step back. We need to get younger. We need to get cheaper. And they have continued to burn assets like crazy just to stay where they were. And they couldn't do that.
Mid.
And they are the epitome of mid. They are maybe the
Mhm.
most average team in the entire NHL. So he gets credit for that. I think the individual trades themselves, you can relitigate in eternity, and Ranger
Yeah.
fans surely will relitigate these trades in eternity. The one last thing I want to get in before I throw it back to you, most of these people in GM, coach, president jobs, most of them are in the soggy middle. Most of them are relatively
Terrible
inconsequential.
term, by the way. Hated that.
What? What? The
Soggy
soggy
middle.
middle,
I
the mushy
hated that.
middle, whatever word you want
Either
to
way,
use to
it's
describe.
not a I hate that. I hate that. But you're right, but I hate it. Go
Most
back to your
people are most people are in that box. Most people in those jobs are just average. There are 4 or 5 guys that coach wise, GM wise, that make a discernible difference from team to team. There is no magic secret silver bullet to doing these jobs. They are difficult. Managing people is the hardest thing to do in sports because you need to have a little bit of a fortune teller instinct to yourself, and no one has that. You don't know how things are going to shake out, and you have to take risks and you have to be calculated. And I can imagine there'll come a point where it'll reach a boiling point in Montreal where y'all will just say, "Can we please make the playoffs and be good?" And
Yeah.
that's not that far away. I think that could be as soon as next year, where the expectation is to come into the season and make the playoffs. But it's coming. And the Rangers, for all of the faults through that window of the picks they missed on, the players they didn't develop properly, they still somehow managed to make 2 conference finals with very flawed rosters, with very imperfect players. And a lot of that is a testament to, just Shesterkin and Panarin. But at a certain point, you got to be able to take that step back and say, we're good. The bar is great. How do we get great? And the Rangers haven't been willing to do that until this year. And you could argue they waited too long.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I saw people in the chat going from Lundqvist to Shesterkin is gross. Yeah, I think, but here's the thing, guys. We saw this was a price. great goalie will cover for things that are issues, and nobody wants to acknowledge your issues until your goalie isn't there anymore. Um, but I think for myself, like kind of what you said about not picking up calls from a GM, um, I would say so far one of the biggest missteps that this organization has made under this new management of Hughes and Gorton is completely putting aside the draft because uh, I think at the end of the day, I think Slav is going to work out. I have no doubt about that. Actually, a lot more sure about that now than I was at the draft, which I think a lot of us were. Most obviously, I'm willing to listen to scouts, but I think there's a lot of like people just heard the name Shane Wright, right? And they thought that like, of course, right? And I think it's the same situation with Slav and Shane Wright, that entire group of like the COVID development curve that everybody's guessing, honestly, even more than usual that, prospects are. Yeah, but like not touching on the drafting at all. Um, I think the biggest mistake they made was the Arturi Lehkonen trade for Justin Barron with the Avs. And I think that was a situation of this was a guy that like Lehkonen wasn't going to stay in Montreal. It was time, right? Just because of where he was with his contract and everything. And story is that Hughes was like, where do you want to go? And that was one of the places that Lecky kind of gave. And they made it work. And I think that was one of those things where they learned a lesson about I don't even know, like, it was Hughes and Gorton working together. Nobody really knows. I think part of it is that, like, Hughes being able to speak French means that he can speak to the media and be more of an outward facing figure, whereas Gorton is just like beside it. Gordon is just there, like looking like a dude, and I really enjoy the dynamic that we're seeing between them because it's just like Hughes is so like fiery and ready to go, and Gorton comparatively is calmer, but he does occasionally, there's a story that Arpon Basu kind of was like when they lost versus the Rangers last game, like Gorton like straight up in front of everybody like slammed his fist against the wall, just pissed as hell. And it's a thing of I think this team not where I was going with this. But what I think I'm trying to say is like I'm personally I've seen missteps, but I think the mix of two kind of cooks in the kitchen in this case is working. I think Kent Hughes knows the player side of things as a former player agent. He has more of a grasp on that, and I think Gorton is more of the mentor. I think overall but I at the end of the day, I do worry about that kind of like power struggle that could come out. There's nothing that like would cause me to believe that. There's no rumors or anything like that. It's just something that like comes to mind, like two powerful men who worked in these positions trying to work together, and eventually something's gonna happen. But for now, I'm enjoying it. So for now, I'm gonna take the cooperation while I can. Just really quickly, guys, want to remind the chat we are going to take questions soon. So if you want to drop some questions in the chat, um, I'm going to. Oh, we didn't even touch on it. Uh, Lane Hudson had an okay game. I think he had a really bad game yesterday, and he had an okay game. And outside of Montreal, those like it's it's hard out here. You know what? I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna stop. He set a record today. He set a record. He got to the top of the scoring race. He played the way he played and he played well. Thoughts? He played well. That's my thoughts.
He's a really interesting case study of when you build the entire plane out of one thing. You know, the joke about why can't they build the entire plane out of the black box that's indestructible? He's fascinating in the sense that he is entirely offense, and the Habs have been willing to say he'll figure out the defense with time. We would rather him figure that out over time and not stunt what he's already good at. It's very like fortune cookie or Facebook wisdom to say, don't ask a fish to climb a tree. But like, don't worry about his defense. Let him do the offense. And with time, and we know defensemen typically develop slower than forwards because it's a lot more of a feel and a tendency based position than forward is. But I think what they're doing is working. I think the
Yeah.
simple matter of the fact is he looks competent at NHL speed. That is the first real
Yes.
point of demarcation for me when I am evaluating a player. Does the game look fast for him or is he dictating the game? And at points, Hudson is good enough to dictate the game. He is a strong enough skater and good enough with the puck on his stick that he can control the game for periods of time. And that's a very rare skill set for that back end. As much as the position has evolved, even in just the last 5 to 10 years, where this wave of Quid and Fox and Luke Hughes and Cale Makar and Heiskanen and Evan Bouchard, that wave of guys, Lane is the next step of that. He's a little bit smaller than most of those guys. He's still a
Mhm.
kid. He'll put on another 5 to 10 pounds as he gets older, as he just becomes an adult. But
His bone doctor was right, apparently. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, he's literally a child.
Yeah.
It sounds weird to say, but like he should be sitting in like a mid-level English class in college right now, not playing professional hockey. He's got to figure it out. He will. He is a good
Yeah.
enough skater, and his puck skills are good enough that at absolute worst, he will be a third pair power play specialist at minimum. At absolute minimum, I can say confidently from what I've seen, he's definitely an NHL caliber player. The question, of course, becomes how good can he be? And I'm very excited to find out because he is that next step of guys in that lineage.
Mhm, mhm. I mean, like, obviously, I'm biased, but, no duh, but, like, for me, it's I think Lane Hudson is so exciting because we haven't seen that. We haven't ever seen that before. We're seeing, like I think having Patrik Laine helps the power play, definitely, but like, the we're seeing a difference maker, I think. Lane Hudson is just really exciting, just really something to look forward to. I think Demidov is obviously, like, the big thing for me. I can't wait to see that man in a Canadiens uniform, like, I'm so excited for that, but Lane Hudson, like you said, is still a child, m again, this is a conversation I was having with Ian Beauvais where we were talking about he looks a little like a Victorian child, a
He
ghost
does.
Victorian child. And when he's wearing his big coat, like you'll it's hilarious. But it's fun to see. I think I was expecting like them to pair him up with a super like defensive minded partner, but they literally just hit full send with him and Matheson. And they were like, honestly, I think between the two of them, sometimes Lane makes better defensive plays. And he's definitely learning defensively. Like I think he's getting better and better, which is what you want to see. Um, and kind of like I think with our defense group, we're in a good position. With Carrier has been such a big difference maker. Um, Such a good move. I think that's another thing to kind of go back to the GM thing is Justin Barron wasn't working out for us. My beloved Justin Barron was not working out for us. And so they kind of they were like, okay, we can end this. It's not we can move on from our mistake before it's too late. And I think they made a really good decision with having Carrier. And now I believe the broadcast was mentioning that so Lane Hudson and Mike Matheson, essentially the plan was everybody thought that it would be a defensive defenseman with Lane Hudson and then a defensive defenseman with Mike Matheson, which was what they were doing was Cooley and Matheson. Both of them are left-handed. So not sure if you know, but that wasn't going to work. So it was a really interesting point that they were making is Cooley and Carey, two very good defensive-minded defensemen, would start in defense in this defensive zone. And whenever they had an opportunity to put a pair out for an offensive kind of position, that's when Matheson and Hudson were put out. So it's been, and I know it seems like so simple, but it's really interesting seeing the evolution of what Marty's doing with the defense because it was either you had like Hudson and Matheson just absolutely giving everybody heartburn because neither of them were very good with each other. They were enabling each other's worst tendencies when they were asked to focus specifically on defense. Um, but in a weird way, I think it's starting to balance out. I think Hudson, with the experience, is getting better and better defensively. Um, with Carrier and Gouli, I feel like now we're seeing Carrier active offensively. We're seeing Gouli active offensively. So I'm just really happy with the direction. That was just a really like a rambly way of saying that, but I'm excited. And I really like being excited because this is a team worth like worth watching these days. And for all like the ultimately you want the big, you want the championship. But for now, there's something really, really fun about this. And I'm sure, like, from a fan, like, from your point of view, where your team is actually expecting something, it's a lot worse. Like, it's like a thing of, like, oh, yay, we're in the wild card place. And you guys are like, oh, we're in the wild card spot. So we're kind of in similar positions, like, literally in the standings, but completely different, just from the point of view of where it's coming from.
Oh, and I think that's an important testament to the power of a good vibe, a good culture is that, yeah, the Habs probably knew they were going to struggle this year to some degree, but they put together that nice little run where it was what, like 7-1-2, 7-2-1, something like that for 10 games. And they're firmly in the mix. I think it's not going to take a lot to get that last playoff spot in the East. It might be
But
like
it's
90
not,
points.
yeah, yeah.
It's not going to be it's not going to be that difficult. And it takes a lot to get a train back on the tracks, and the Rangers are very adeptly racking up loser points like crazy over the last few weeks, and that's getting them back in the mix. It's kind of insane. They went 5-15-1, and they still have a chance to make the playoffs, the Rangers, over an extended period of time. They were an absolute atrocity to watch, but somehow you put together one good week and you're right back in the mix.
That's the East for you, baby.
The East is so bad.
It's rough. It's rough. It's rough out here. I mean, I'm not mad at it because it's allowing this amount of, like you said, playing meaningful games, I think. And I am going to, by the way, I will easily ban people. Don't get on my nerve. I am going to put you in timeout. And you can come back later if you can be nice. Sorry. So we are going to, oh no. Oh my God. That, no. My bad. Okay, I'm gonna fix that later. I'm so sorry, Trinka. Didn't mean to do that. Um, so I'm going to look at the chat for questions. Sorry, just had a whole panic moment. Jesus. So I saw some questions earlier. The JT Miller thing. What's up with that?
Um, your guess is as good as mine. Rangers are very much in, I would say, desperation mode, and I don't think JT Miller fixes the fundamental issues of the team. He's undoubtedly a good hockey player. Anybody who can record a 100-point season is good at hockey. I don't think he fixes their defensive issues. I think he could exacerbate the perceived locker room issues that are there. I think he is an imperfect understanding of what's wrong with the team. Like, yeah, they're not scoring enough. They're not doing enough to create offense. Okay, let's go get another good forward. But what does Miller do that makes him successful in Vancouver? What is struggling with the Rangers? Where are you going to play JT Miller if you trade for him? Are you going to play him down the middle? Or okay, there are a lot of questions I have about what they think JT Miller would do for them that I don't see. Because when you watch the Rangers on a nightly basis, it is so abundantly clear their big issue is defense. It is
Yeah.
so abundantly clear that they're atrocious in transition, other than when Adam Fox is out there. They can't defend the net front at all. And they consistently break down, where if you cycle them 2 or 3 times in the offensive zone, you get a defenseman out of position almost with certainty. And The trade package is probably cost prohibitive. What are you sending? What aren't you sending? I I don't think JT Miller fixes the Rangers. Would he make them better? Probably. But I don't think the goal should be to try and win the Stanley Cup this year. I think the goal should be to trade Lindgren, Borgen, Jimmy Vesey, all the pending UFAs. And you look at what the cap is at this summer, if everyone's right and it's what, 97, like they're projecting, then
Yeah.
we can have an honest conversation about improving the roster. But adding JT Miller for the stretch run this year, I don't think it's going to make a huge difference because I think the Rangers' issues are so much more than just one guy.
So, like, but it seems like it is, I don't want to say inevitable because anything can happen, but what would make you, if it were to happen, not absolutely hate life? Like, what is something that you can find reasonable, but uh still work? I think work, and I think I'd also, it's hard to do, but I'd I'd ask you to look at this from a Vancouver point of view too. Like, what do you think works for both teams? What can you see? Or do you just not see anything and you're like, why are we
Okay,
doing
so
this?
this is a good question because I myself have thought about this a lot over the last few days because I think the big issue the Rangers have is they think Braden Schneider is a lot better than he actually is because they traded Kako for Will Borgen like a month ago. Will Borgen, who is 28 years old and has less than 300 career NHL games played, and he is getting 2 more minutes per game than Braden Schneider, who they drafted 20th overall 4 years ago. How is a guy you drafted 4 years ago with a premium pick? You traded up. You burned a draft pick to trade up to take Braden Schneider, and he can't get more minutes than the guy you just traded for a few weeks ago, who doesn't really have a ton of NHL success. I think if I were running this and I really wanted JT Miller, I would be trading Braden Schneider. I would be trading one of their mid-level forwards, whether that's Filipino, Brennan Othman, Adam Sikora, who got held out of the Hartford game as possibility of being in the trade, and a pick. I don't really think I don't think trading I don't think you're going to get any of the big guys to waive their no moves to go to Vancouver. That's the thing. Everybody's saying, well, if they just do like Mika and something for JT Miller and make the money's pretty close, the term is pretty close, so neither team is really getting the raw end of the deal. Why would Mika Zibanejad uproot his entire life and agree to go to Vancouver? I mean, it's
Especially like
just
that's it's in his contract. He did that
yeah,
specifically to keep something like this from happening. Like
exactly.
it's his right in his contract.
I struggle to see how they get over the finish line without the Rangers overpaying. That's really the thing. And look, from a Vancouver perspective, and this is going to sound a little naive, but like sit them down in a room like adults and figure it out.
Yeah.
These are gifted hockey players who we saw last year. The Canucks are one overtime goal away from going to the conference finals last year. They were a great team last year. They had home ice against
I
the
don't
Oilers
know
last
what's
year.
happening.
And that's the thing. They need to sit everyone. I don't see how if you're Vancouver, you win trading a star player away. We consistently see in the NHL that trading the star player for the bag of mystery objects doesn't work out for you. Some on
What if
occasion
I'm
do.
different? What if I'm different? I'm
That's
built
really the
different.
thing.
What if it happens to me?
I mean, the Habs have a good example. I would say they won the Max Pacioretty trade. I would say they won the superstar player trade for the mystery box, if you will. But it's really hard to
Which, by
do.
the way, Marc
Look,
Bergevin wanted Cody Glass. He did not want Nick Suzuki, and thank God it's that Nick Suzuki is here. But that's separate
look at what
rant.
happened to the look at what happened to the Canucks with Bo Horvat. You got a
True.
first round pick. You got Atu Ratu, who probably isn't an NHLer. And that's really all you have to show for Bo Horvat, who, look, the Islanders, that was a stupid trade to make for them. They were very, 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 very short-sighted in making that decision. But they got the better player, and they didn't have to give up a lot. I think this is a rare case where I can make an argument both teams would lose the trade if they were a way to make it happen.
You really think so? Because for
Yeah,
me
because
personally, it just seems like it seems like from Vancouver. Like that's where it seems like that would be worse for them.
Oh,
Um,
100%.
Kaya from Game Over Vancouver, and I have talked a little bit, by which I mean it devolved on our crossover stream about how like this is just it's insane that like these
Yeah.
two guys just like not getting along could potentially set back a franchise because you're not going to win a trade like with like a star player. You're just not. Especially when everybody knows your star player's only wants to go to like one or two places. So it's just it's ridiculous to I don't know, everybody talks about like the toxicity and like everything like that, but at the end of the day, yes, culture is important, but winning fixes a lot.
Yeah.
Again, I said this to Kaya. I'm like, sometimes JT Miller reminds me a little bit of Mac McKinnon, and I'm in terms of like the how tough he can be on his teammates. You know, I'm a big Avs fan, so I am a big Nathan McKinnon defender, and I will tell people there is more going on than that. So whatever. But from the like outside, that's kind of what it is. But you know what? Nathan McKinnon is a heart winner. So that fixes a lot. It glosses over a lot. So if you guys could just get along long enough for this team to work well, maybe you guys would get along even more. Like it's just this like, you got to be adults about it. But you're right. Like it seems so naive, but it's I just don't understand why they can't make it work. It's so immature.
It's just unprofessional. Like at a certain level, if you're sitting there as JT Miller, you got to realize that you are actively putting your team in a bad spot by all of this being out there. It's insane to me that the Canucks, who last year had their best season in a decade, and we're a handful of months removed, and they're fighting for their playoff lives, and they might trade JT Miller for the mystery box, which like I wouldn't be trading with the Rangers if I was trying to get stuff back that I actually wanted, because
Yeah.
all of the Rangers' liquid assets, they all have warts. Like Filipino on paper, really good. He's got like 6 or 7 diagnosed concussions, and if you trade for him, you're one bad hit away from him being permanently LTIR'd. Braden
Yeah.
Schneider is maybe a second pair defenseman at best. I don't think that's what you trade JT Miller for. Brennan Othman is 3 years removed from his draft. He's played 2 NHL games. They're not going to trade Gabriel Perreault for him. Zibanejad has a no move. Kreider has a limited no move. Trocheck has a full no move. Panarin has a full no move. They're just, I don't see a trade
They're
for the
giving out
Rangers.
no moves like so.
The Rangers did they gave Barclay Goodrow a full no move for the first 3 years of that contract. And when you are a team that is up against the cap ceiling, you have a choice to make. Do I give the guy more money, or do I do the no move? I hope they have learned their lesson with what's happened over the last 6 months between Trouba and Gaudreau about just throwing those out there to try and lower the AAV by $1 million or so.
Does
You're
not work.
always better.
No.
You're always better off giving the guy more money than giving them the no trade protection. Always.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's the game that we're all playing in terms of so personally, I really would love and die for having Jake Evans on this team long term. I think he'd be a good piece. I also understand the argument for trading. That's not what I'm saying. We don't need to get into that chat because
I
I
have
will get
wanted Jake
sad.
Evans
And
for a while. I'm not gonna
have
lie to you.
you? Have
I
you?
I
I feel
I
like
I
nobody
am a noted
recognizes my boy the way I do.
I am a noted Jake Evans respecter. I have had him on my trade bait lists for the last 3 years of this is who you would like for your third or fourth line center on a good team. I wholeheartedly see the vision.
I totally I think this is a guy who he at some point was playing the second highest forward time on ice. Now that's not a good thing. Don't get me wrong. That's a sign of how rough things were going for the Habs. But he was performing like well enough there, and I was like, man, we gotta like. This is a guy like Nick Suzuki and him are friends. They're he's one of the only like actual products from the Marc Bergevin era that like was developed and became a thing instead of like going somewhere else, being traded in a bad trade, not working out, all these things. So there's a certain sentimental value to keeping that, I think. I also just like the dude. But anyways, other like we are talking about the possibility of what a contract looks like. Now, ever since his shooting luck has dried up, it's been really funny to see because before anything he threw at the net would like go in so like constantly, and now it's a complete battle for him. So I feel bad for him, but it's also funny. So people were talking about what a contract could be, and the argument is you give him more time and he'll take less money, or you give him more money and you give him a shorter contract. And I'm like, okay, that's a discussion we can have, but don't start giving clauses like that. Like the clauses that like the Rangers kind of ended up giving. You again, love Jake Evans. I don't want him, he's not the kind of player that you want to give that much power to. Um you got to save those for your Demidovs, for your Lane Hudsons. You got to save those. You can't have a whole team full of no move clauses, which I don't feel like the Rangers got that memo.
Nope.
No.
That was a Gorton thing too. Gorton did that to give Trouba the full no move.
That is
Trouba
so
never
funny.
they and look, I get it. 2017, 2018, they traded away like all of their good players, and they came into that next season thinking they needed 6 new defensemen. They had like 30-something-year-old Mark Stahl. They didn't have Lindgren yet. They didn't have Fox yet. They didn't have Trouba. They didn't have basically any defensemen of note who were good. They had Brendan Smith. They had Mark Stahl. And they figured we need to turn over this entire defense. And they traded for Trouba. They traded for Adam Fox. They still had D'Angelo as well, who I forgot. And they said, we'll figure it out. And over time, they found 6 guys they liked well enough. And ultimately, that's what it comes down to. You know, you got to find the right mix of guys. And it takes time. It takes a lot of time to find the right mix of guys.
Yeah, I think especially in a city like Montreal and, on your end, New York, it's everybody talks about the pressure and the media and everybody's so mean
Oh, the
to us
Rangers
all
get
the
away with
time.
murder. The
That's
Rangers get away with murder. No one cares. In New
that,
York, the media-wise, no one cares. There are
see,
3
that's
people
the
who cover the
thing.
Rangers. It doesn't matter. The Rangers can hide in plain sight. They really can.
Peter
In
Ball, my
Montreal,
beloved.
in Montreal, they are the sun. Everything revolves around the Habs.
Yeah. There's not a
Here,
lot else happening. That's why I think New York has a lot happening.
between the 2 baseball teams, the 2 football teams, the 2 basketball teams, the women's basketball team, the women's soccer team, the 2 MLS teams, yeah, there's more than enough cover for the Rangers to get. There's 2 other hockey teams. I mean,
It's true.
objective, you can hide in plain sight as the Rangers, and really, you will not get blamed for anything.
Yeah. Yeah, I think kind of like the reason I come at that in that way is, you have the whole prestige of the franchise and you have um the idea of a destination franchise, destination city. I forgot what the term is, but like a team that players want to go to because they like the place itself. I think,
Yeah.
you have that kind of appeal, I think, in New York. And to me, I am on the soapbox of Montreal is a great place to be, guys. And
I love Montreal.
if you are rich, your lawyers are the best at finding ways out of taxes. So, like, you're okay, guys. You will be worshipped. Like, you will be if you're winning this, it'll be a great place for you to be. Um, but that's my pitch. Be good, guys. Be good. So I
Whoever ends
saw
the drought.
that's it. Like whoever, it's not even nobody cares. Nobody really cares. All they want at the end of the day is to have that thing back. That glory. That's that what it's never going to be what it used to be because what it used to be was like 4 teams and the Habs were like had 50% of the players somehow, although being 14, but they have 50% of the players. So it's never going to be that. And I think that's also a weird discussion to have about Carey Price, Hall of Fame, Ray getting his number retired. That's a discussion that like I get mad about a lot. Um, Me mad on the internet? Surely not. But yeah, so I'm gonna it is getting very late, and I'm sorry to keep you this late, but I'm just gonna look over our chat really quickly, see if there's any last questions that we want to get in. I do see Josh. Thank you for stopping by and being nice as a Leafs fan. We talked a little bit about Marty a little bit earlier, so we kind of just said that we think we didn't know what he was, and I personally I think he's getting better and better. He's still learning because duh, and I think he's learning with the team. And I think right now where he is the perfect coach for this perfect team, or the perfect coach for this team. Not perfect. They are not perfect. Um, so Bernardo is saying that the rumor was Lafreniere. Uh, Apparently just that. I also saw that. I don't know, man. I was just like, I don't know what either of those teams are thinking, really, in that moment. Like you said, it doesn't make any sense. I don't think either of these teams are winning that one.
Yeah,
Um,
no, Lafreniere doesn't make sense from a Rangers perspective. They just gave him that contract like 3 months ago.
yeah, yeah, they clearly want to keep him, which, like, fair enough. I mean, it, it's it's also a thing of, like you said, what are you gonna give? Like, I think it's the shiny kind of name thing of what's a
Yeah.
recognizable name that we can put out. Now, Elliot Friedman is one of the more reliable sources, so if I'm gonna trust anybody's, here's the random word I put out. But for some, I just don't. I just feel like this is all gonna end very anticlimactically in that, like, no,
This is the
nothing's gonna
NHL, of
happen.
course it will.
Yeah, nothing exciting is gonna happen. Earlier, Trinka, which again, feel really bad about accidentally timing you out. I saw them say that like I was thinking that there should be a Ted Lasso kind of coach right before Marty was hired, and then I was like, this is the NHL, it's not gonna happen. So honestly, if for nothing else, for the narrative of something fun happening, I'm glad that Marty showed up. Just like randomly just came out of nowhere and was like, hey, I'm the coach of this organization now. So um, I'm going to. Oh, also, uh, Cooley, I think.
Real cool, yeah.
Yeah, him on the broadcast. I was getting so confused because I'm obviously watching out for Caden Gooley. And so I'd hear Cooley, I'd look up. It was not Caden Gooley, but they were on each other a lot this game. So I was like, this is specifically made to trip me up, I think. Um, MFM earlier asked about the Lafreniere rumor. It's just a stupid rumor, right? Probably, I think, is where we're at.
It's a stupid rumor until it isn't, unfortunately.
That's, yeah, that's the PK Subban classic, the PK Subban in Montreal classic. Okay, guys, I'm not seeing any more questions, but thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate Nick being here. Well, my bad. I don't know where I was going with this. I really appreciate you being here today. It is a little later into the night, and I am going to let you go soon, but would you like to tell everybody where they can find you?
Sure, on Twitter and Blue Sky, it's just and Instagram, it's just and TikTok, we can say that again. TikTok, it's Nick Zararis, Nick Zararis. I do Ranger stuff, I do Oiler stuff, I do a little NFL, a little baseball, a little bit of everything. I am unfortunately compulsively sports brained, and it's slowly ruining my life, but it's also very fun.
Listen, if you're as long as you're not like the weird kind of bet sports brain guy who like goes into players like comments and is like, "Why would you do that? You lost me money." That's
If
the
you
weirdest kind of
ever
sports guy.
if you ever at anyone who is famous online about anything, you're not using the internet correctly.
What if I don't know, like Sabrina Carpenter to be my best friend? Like maybe that's a little better, but even then
No,
the tone's got to be right. The tone's got to be right.
yeah.
It's got to be it's got to be a very specific tone to not get blocked. I'd really like for that not to happen. I will. Okay, I'm gonna end this. I will put Nick's information in the description box below. Everybody who's joined us today, and thank you very much. Apologies again to Trinka. Um, this is the first time I've ever muted anybody in the chat, so I think this just got a little bit confusing, but thank you so much for joining us. If you are watching on or listening to the podcast, be sure to leave us comments. I'm always happy to interact. I'm always happy to talk shit and also just talk. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate having you here, and we are going to head out. Good night.